Great.
Sorry, yeah, carry on.
Hello, thank you for talking to me today. My name is Frankie Talbot. And this is Chris, who's going to be interpreting for us today. Have you worked with interpreters before?
Yeah, I have. Have you?
Yes, yeah, I have.
Okay, thank you.
Super. So we'll start talking about the topic then. So I think that we can all agree that fire safety for deaf people is a very important issue.
So if you carry on, sorry, so I'm just going to be interpreting consecutively today. So if you are just able to, you can just introduce yourself like normal, just talk like normal, everything you want to say. And basically what I'll just be doing is I'll just make a few notes, and then when you're finished talking, I'll interpret that across to the deaf.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, do you want me to start again? Or
Yeah, up to you. So, sorry, what you prefer to do.
okay. We'll keep going then. So, if we start by going back a bit to when you were growing up, I was wondering what happened if a fire alarm went off while when you were at school.
So would you like to know secondary or primary school? Which one?
Both or either?
So basically, in primary school, there used to be a red light that would flash going off in the primary school, and so when we each saw that light flashing, then we would all get together and collectively go to the fire safety point. I'm trying to remember my experience. I can't quite remember. I remember first school was quite a long time ago. So actually, what used to happen in Martin's experience was at boarding school he used to attend. So in the evening, when it was going off, the evening staff would actually come to them, wake them up, and then they would go down to the meeting point all together. So John's experience was when obviously they were asleep at night time, they used to have the covers over their head so they couldn't actually see the flashing lights taking place. So it used to be somebody would come into the room, wake them up, and then take them down to the meeting point. So Martin's saying that actually there were only 2 deaf people in his school that he went to at secondary school. So when that happened, it just meant that they would follow the rest of the people in his secondary school and they would all go. So sometimes you get a bit worried that perhaps they would forget about him, but they all went down to the meeting point together. So he said when he went to college, it was a boarding school, and so they had a lot better procedure going on at that place. So they had like buddy systems where people would be responsible to come and wake them up and be responsible to let them know.
Great. And now you're adults and you work in environments that are designed for hearing people. I was wondering if you think that fire safety for deaf people has improved over the years.
So John explains that actually he feels that it's worse now in his experience in his professional life because when he was at school it was a lot more visual things, they would have flashing lights and so on, but when he went to work he struggled because it was very much had to rely upon things audiologically, so therefore there would only be sirens and noises, which meant that it's a lot harder to see, and he relies a lot more on people nowadays. And so notice that sometimes that they do have some pages and so on that the organisations can give to John, but he feels that actually in the real world it's very rare that when you arrive somewhere somebody remembers to give you a pager, so it's very rarely you get given it. So saying actually within his school experience, it was actually a lot more people, it seems like nowadays within school, a lot more people are aware. So you have a lot more staff that have gone on deaf awareness training, so they're aware of deaf people and how to approach it. But when you kind of approach the workplace, you found that actually there aren't that many. So modern days, there's more people that are sort of prepared for it now through deaf awareness training, but people that were given things like pagers, but he actually doesn't like using a pager because sometimes he'll remember to have it on him and then he has to give it back, and he'll have it, he won't have it, and so it can be a bit frustrating to have to sort of manage where it is and where it's at all the time. So actually we just prefer to have organisations instill the lights and the flashing lights. It just obviously gives a little bit more self-reliance as well. As John's explaining, that actually when you're working for deaf organisations, a lot of them will have deaf staff, so they'll be prepared with pagers and they'll be prepared with what happens in those situations. But working self-employed and freelancing, where you go to different organisations that aren't necessarily deaf aware or have received any training or are aware of how to approach deaf people, then actually it's a lot more difficult because they don't necessarily provide the pages, or they just assume that you know what to do in fire issues, safety issues. So actually it's a little bit different. So Martin asked the question, first of all, so he said, within new buildings now, one of them is in the regulations that they should put in the flashing lights for fire safety, obviously for deaf people. But John responded and said, actually they don't. So here at UWE, the new building that's just gone up over the road here, they've obviously built a new building, but there isn't actually any flashing lights installed. which Martin obviously was very shocked by and thought, we would have thought in the modern day and age that would be included within the building regulations nowadays.
I would agree. So, moving away from work for a minute, some deaf people say that they feel unsafe in other public spaces, like, for example, hotels. I was wondering if you agreed with that.
As you're right, so the Premier Inn actually have given me a vibrating paging alarm before, which I put under my pillow. But sometimes I do worry about that when I go to, let's say, a public place and I use the public restroom, then I can be quite worried to think, is the fire alarm going off? How would I know? Because there's no flashing lights and I can't hear the alarm. So am I just going to be left in the building or locked in the building with a fire? So that is one of my concerns. But when I'm shopping, it's obviously slightly different because I can just follow the big crowds of people. So he's just, Martin's explaining that actually that is a concern when he does go to different hotels. He feels that when he does go, he has to tell them at reception to make sure that he is deaf, and they'll usually set up something where in John's case they can give you a pager where it can vibrate under the pillow, but in most cases they say they'll send somebody up to make sure they come and let you know, which obviously makes him feel a bit awkward because he doesn't want to, somebody coming into his private space like that, especially when it's a private room. And then secondly, he says actually when he went to America, to Disney for a holiday, his experience was in the hotel room, if there was a fire alarm going off, if somebody was to knock on the door, then they were given a room where the lights would flash. So if somebody was knocking on the door to let them know the flashes would be going off. Obviously in the past, he's got a hearing daughter, so usually sometimes they would text or just do like a mini-com, just to let him know that there was a fire alarm going off. But I was quite impressed with the hotels in America, in Florida that was. So John's explained that sometimes when he goes to like a library or quite a quiet public place, he sometimes gets a bit nervous to think, well, how, because usually if you're a public place like that, you would follow the big crowds of people, but where there's somebody where the footfall is very low, then he's a little bit, it's in the back of his mind goes, if there was a fire going off, how would I know that, I can't follow a big crowd of people, so how would I know that I'm safe? Who would come let me know? Well, so Martin's explaining that actually when he was driving home one time to go to, in Kent, where his parents lived, that he jumped onto the tube, and late at night, actually he went down and he thought it was strange, there was nobody there, entered the underground station. And what happened was there was just this man pointing at him saying, get out, get out. But obviously he was there like, what? Like, you want to get out? And so he's like, yeah, leave. So as he goes to leave, there was this police tape saying you're not allowed in, and it ended up being that there was a bomb scare. And so that was obviously quite alarming and scary. There should have been some sort of notification for deaf people. But there was no signs or nothing. I guess people had announced it over a tannoy, and I'd completely missed it because I was deaf. So it's a case where I got lucky, but it could have been quite disastrous.
So, as an example of an alerting system, I spoke to a teaching institution that said that they used a buddy system for a deaf member of staff, where a hearing member of staff would be chosen to alert the deaf person to tell them when the fire alarm is going off. And I was wondering what you think of that system.
No, I don't like it. So I like to be independent. I don't like it if persons feel like they're looking after me. I feel like it's the organisation's responsibility to install something to help me to be independent. And so I like to be independent. I don't like to feel like somebody is, looking after me, and maybe it's because an organisation feels like it's cheaper. But I feel like they should pay that little bit extra so that it teaches me to be independent. Also, if I obviously go to the toilet, how's that person going to let me know whilst I'm, taking a slightly bit longer on the toilet? Then how are they going to let me know? Are they just going to barge in on me? Also saying, Martin's explaining that it could be a case where, say if there was not enough time to go and find, then actually, say if that person had died and the deaf person had died from like smoke inhalation or something, and then the buddy system comes looking for them, then actually you'd have two deaths on your hand, not necessarily one death. So John's also explaining that, say for example, at a big organisation such as UE, where we're at today, say if there was 4 deaf people working at different parts of the campus, does this mean that one buddies person would have to run to all 4 different locations? Somebody's bound to die in that experience. And they'd have to be quite fit as well, Martin says. John's also explained that such an organisation as UE is quite big. It should be quite easy for them to update their technology. So it's something that they do for their classrooms, especially for the students. So you would hope that they would just be able to install flashing lights.
Very good points. So now I'd like to ask you about which alarm methods you prefer, if there are any that you don't like at all, and if there are any that you're particularly keen on.
So Martin's just saying, I think it's actually quite clear from this conversation that we like the flashing lights to be installed. And that's all we need. Not necessarily pages, don't really feel like that works. Just install some flashing lights that would catch our attention so we can see. John's also explained that he feels that it's easier to see a flashing light, that if you're given a pager, it's something that you're responsible for. Obviously they cost money, so you feel responsible to hand it back to them, and then obviously you have to rent it back out as well. And so it's just a bit of a hassle that really doesn't necessarily need to happen. So also, John's explaining that, let's say there was an event here, they would say it costs 30 deaf people to come to an event at the university, it's in the evening, are they really going to give out 30 different pages to everybody? So, really just saying it would just be much easier if they had lights, everybody can see that, and surely that would be cheaper and much more manageable as well. So Martin's also explaining that as well, when you get given a pager, you have to make sure, the upkeep of it as well, to make sure that it's always charged, that it's always working. Is there perhaps a system where somebody just pushes a button and it's going to make sure that every pager works? Then how do you manage that system? And so, it just seems a bit silly giving everybody pagers when they can just install these lights. Okay, so John had an experience where he was given a pager by an organisation, and he felt it, he was teaching a class, and he felt it vibrate, which meant that he told everyone, oh, the fire alarm's coming off, we need to go now. And the students are looking at him baffled because he's saying, well, there isn't any noise going off. And so he pulls it out of his pocket and he says, oh, it was just a warning for a low battery. And it's quite embarrassing.
So this is really interesting for me because there's lots that I don't know about fire pages actually, so you've raised a lot of really important points. So what I'd like to ask you now is if you had the power to make a law about fire safety today, would you make a law, and what would it be?
As John would say, I'd make sure that it's in the building regulations for every new building that's being built, or for every building pretty much, that they would have a red flashing light installed. So for example, to make it equal for deaf people, there's a law for people in wheelchairs that they need to make sure they have a certain width to be able to get the wheelchairs through, and need to make sure that you have ramps going up to stairs. For it to be equal for deaf people, surely there should be a law surrounding every building should have these red flashing lights in. Yeah, I think there should be a law for everything really, that just to make sure that deaf people are safe, that again they have access to technology, that also they have equal rights in education, and as well that they have the fourth one. Sorry, no barriers. So really, sorry, just to summarise again, it's just that there should be no barriers across any of these sectors, such as like safety, technology, education. Just that for deaf people, we just shouldn't really be having these access barriers, especially within the modern day that we live in. So, for example, people in wheelchairs were to say, oh, we need to lower this part of the board, we need to lower this, then they would do that for a wheelchair user. It feels like for deaf people, when we complain about things, why don't we necessarily see changes? So it just obviously makes you wonder that, with all of the different noises that are going off across the institution, why can't they just have lights going across at the same time? So it just makes you wonder, why can't they just, if they can set the sounds to go off, why can't they just set lights to be going off as well?
I have actually looked into this bit. Some people say that they don't want to install flashing lights because of the risk to people with photosensitive epilepsy, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, but I'm sure that there can be changes made to the lights to make sure that they're less hazardous for those people. So John's saying, if there's somebody who's epileptic, it doesn't necessarily have to be a flashing light, it could just be perhaps one glaring light that just switches on. So Martin's explaining that there could be an option that you could turn the setting of the lights, so you could switch it from flashing, and just lots of different settings that you could have. So if somebody was having epilepsy in the room, they can set it to different levels. As Martin's explaining that perhaps somebody who's perhaps living in a flat, so for example, like when they're building new flats and living accommodations for people, they can have the option to, let's say, turn off the lights so they just have the noises, but that option should be given to deaf people as well, where they can turn off the sound essentially, but you have the lights turned on, so it can be catered towards that person. You have that option to be able to do so. And again, saying, so John's explaining that perhaps if the flashing lights were such an issue, then why don't we change, why is it not an issue for people who are cycling bikes on the streets? Obviously they have flashing lights at the front of their bikes to warn drivers that they're there. So,
Why is it that they can have a flashing lights, but yet deaf people can't have them within buildings?
I think that's another good point, and I think, you know,
Point.
we can put a man on the moon. Surely we can make a fire alarm system that works for everybody. I wonder how we're doing for time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need to leave? Or
Yes, I think we've gone through the questions. But thank you so much for talking to me. It's been really interesting.
all right. Thank you very much.